All right, hello everyone. Thank you again for joining the presentation this evening. The presentation that we will be hosting is the grant writing workshop focusing on student dissertation funds. And our presenters for this evening are Dr. Catherine McGraw and Ms. Sandra Del Toro. I'll fill you in a little bit on the background of both of our presenters. Dr. Catherine McGraw is the Associate Vice President with the Office of Sponsored Programs and has worked in higher education for the past 14 years and has over 20 years of experience in program development, grant writing, and administration of grant-funded programs. She's been at the Chicago School since 2012 when she established the Office of Sponsored Programs. She's previously worked at Howard University, first as grants administrator and special assistant to the vice provost for research and dean of the graduate school, where she was responsible for grant writing and technical assistance for over 300 graduate faculty of the university, while also working in the areas of academic program review, strategic planning, and student program development. In her career at Howard, she authored successful external funding proposals that brought more than $10 million to the university and has coached and assisted hundreds of faculty grant writers to successfully receive external funding. Dr. McGraw received her PhD in English Lit from Howard University, holds a master's degree from Georgetown University and the University of Pennsylvania, and received her undergrad degree from Yale. So welcome, Dr. McGraw.
Thank you.
Our second presenter is Sandra Del Toro, and Ms. Sandra Del Toro is the Director with the Office of Sponsored Programs and has over 16 years of experience in grant writing, program development, and administration of grant-funded programs. She's been at the Chicago School of Professional Psychology since 2014, when she began serving as the first campus-based sponsored program staff member while serving as assistant director. She previously served as vice president of development and communications for Mujeres Latinas en Acción, the nation's oldest Latina-serving and Latina-led organization. While at the organization, she worked with staff to leverage nearly $1 million in federal funds for program expansions. As a senior education organizer for the Southwest Organizing Project, she expanded grant initiatives by $3.7 million and developed a school-based programming designed to encourage parental leadership development, teacher quality and retention, and teacher and family engagement. Sandra Del Toro received her master's degree in public policy studies from the University of Chicago and her undergraduate degree from Stanford University. Welcome, Sandra.
Thank you.
So we will go ahead and begin the presentation. If anyone does have any questions throughout the presentation, please type your questions into the chat box, and at the end of the presentation, we will spend some time answering some of those questions. So Dr. McGraw, please feel free to begin the presentation.
Thank you very much, Ellen. Thank you for inviting us to speak today, and thank you to so many of you who are here for the presentation. We're really very excited to be able to offer to students some important information that I'm sure you're eager to gain some knowledge of the grant writing process, particularly perhaps right now for your interest in student funding. Dissertation funding will be something we'll connect everything to, but what we really hope to do today is to give you some skills that will be useful not only in seeking student and dissertation funding, but hopefully throughout your career that you'll be able to use for grant writing purposes. So I'm starting with a slide that talks about some of our goals for this presentation. I will start with the first part of the presentation, and then Sandra will take it from there. We're going to look at the different types of grants that individuals and organizations can apply for. We're going to look specifically within the individual category at student grants and at dissertation fellowships as one category, and what each of those types of grants can fund. we're going to look a little bit at timing, because it is a critical factor for anyone applying for a grant, but I think particularly at the Chicago School, you are on a fast track for your degree. And so if you are looking for funding for your educational program, for your dissertation, for a master's thesis, or for any kind of project, really it's important to start today. You'll have many more options, both in terms of what you can find and also how you can fit it into your program. So I'll talk a little bit about that. Sandra is going to demonstrate and help you understand the resource called the COS Pivot Database, which is a funding opportunity database. And then she'll present some of the typical elements of a grant proposal of any type, really, and some tips for being as competitive as possible as a grant writer. So this first slide breaks down two categories of grants, and I think it's important because many of you are students and are probably thinking of funding right now as something that is specifically focused on your individual educational situation and your educational needs. And there are specifically individual grants that meet that kind of purpose. But there are also organizational grants, and it's important to know for now and for the future what those differences are, so that you're seeking the right kind of funding to meet your needs for yourself or for a particular project. So as the slide says, individual grants are paid directly to an individual person, often in the form of a check. And similarly, the application or the proposal for the funding is submitted directly by the individual to the funder. This is the case for most student funding, scholarships being a term I'm sure you're aware of, and fellowships may be somewhat new to some of you. Both of those are our typical individual student funding types. It is possible that non-students can get individual grants. Sometimes a faculty member at a university or a professional in a field will get what's often called a fellowship, and that may often be an individual grant award as well. The other type of award, and really I think what the vast majority of the time when people are talking about a grant in much of the grants world, what they're talking about is an organizational grant. And in this case, organizational grants are paid, money is paid only to an organization directly, not to the employee or the individual working there. And that organization almost always has to have a nonprofit tax status, 501c3. Based on that money that the organization receives, there has been a proposal that outlines how the organization will use it, and what the money is to be spent for, and the organization will then spend the money based on those purposes. Unlike the individual grant that is submitted by the individual to the funder, an organizational grant proposal often has to be submitted by a designated official of the organization on behalf of the organization. So it can't just be something that one employee writes and sends on their own. If it's on behalf of the organization, it's submitted by the organization. And these are grants that can pay for things like research, programs providing services, training participants. So it's oftentimes faculty members at universities who are conducting research submit a grant that is actually an organizational grant, even though it pays for the faculty members' research. Organizations in the community submit organizational grants to develop and deliver program services or to train other people. So those are some key distinctions that I wanted to draw, because when you're looking for funding, whether it's now or in the future, you'll need to know which category a grant falls into in order to both complete it properly, but also to get the funding that you need. So right now, I'm sure that many of you are here today interested in what kinds of funding are available for you as a student. And I've highlighted dissertation fellowships because that was the genesis of the presentation, and we're certainly going to talk about dissertation fellowships. But there are also student grants that are in the category of scholarships. There are other types of fellowship grants, and there are other types of grants that students can receive that are in other categories, whether they might be for research purposes specifically or for travel purposes are a couple of examples. So to define a fellowship, since I've started to use that word, a fellowship is typically a basic stipend amount, either a monthly or annual stipend, plus payment of tuition. And the purpose of a fellowship is to allow the student or fellow to have a basic standard of living that allows that individual to focus nearly exclusively on their program of study or their research. So fellowships are usually multi-year, often a 3 to 5 year period of award. And the expectation, which is sometimes a difficult one to live with, is that the fellow has no other full-time employment while receiving the fellowship funds. So when I'm talking about fellowships, I'm talking generally about student grant awards that fall into this kind of category. And within that category, of course, is a dissertation fellowship. And this is one type of funding that those of you who are here today looking for dissertation grants will find in your searches as an option for you to apply for. The specific purpose of the dissertation fellowship, of course, is to fund the costs related to the period that a doctoral student is researching and writing a doctoral dissertation. So it will have a varying amount of funding depending on the funder. It may include tuition for dissertation credits specifically, and it may include a stipend for living expenses, and it also may sometimes have an itemized budget for the expected research costs of the dissertation itself. There are a whole range of funders that support dissertation fellowships. They include both large and smaller foundations, major federal government agencies as well. And which one is appropriate for an individual student is going to depend on the doctoral program and research area that you're in. The proposal process is fairly extensive, which is part of why I started with a note about timing. And it focuses specifically on the plans for the dissertation, previous and current preparation to do research, and also somewhat on the general background of the student who's applying. But the major focus is on the dissertation itself. So I've listed one example. This is not to say, and unfortunately PsyD students are not eligible for this particular one, but this is not to say this opportunity is the best one for any of you, but we wanted to give some examples of things that you might be able to look up and then get a sense of what these dissertation fellowships involve. So I've also included some slides on the other types of fellowships, and for some of you who are perhaps earlier in a doctoral program, a pre-doctoral fellowship might be as useful or might be just what you need. This funds the pre-dissertation phase of a doctoral program, usually before the dissertation proposal has been approved. Now, when I speak of all of these, I do understand and know that the Chicago School program of study is not identical to what you might see at research universities, and so to some extent we'll have to do some research to see how the funders would define where you are in your program to fit their eligibility. But for the most part, if you're early in a program and are not at the point of actually actively working on the dissertation, pre-doctoral fellowships might be an option. So they're similar in many ways to a dissertation fellowship, with the exception that they don't fund the dissertation research specifically. So they do fund some of the other similar costs, tuition, stipends, have many times they're the same funders, just a different category, foundations, federal agencies, and it is a pretty extensive proposal process as well. So again, if that is something that is of interest, it's best to start investigating what's available as soon as possible. I have an example here from a federal agency, the National Institutes of Health, for example. And then if it turns out perhaps that any of you who are interested in dissertation fellowships find that it's not practical for you to do that if the timing doesn't work, but you are thinking of your postdoctoral period, there are fellowships for postdoctoral fellows as well. And in this case, it's a little bit different. It is more of funding to create a slot as an employment or a employment/trainee position as a postdoctoral researcher. And what may be of interest as well here is that there are postdoctoral fellowships for funding clinical positions as well. The funding provided is typically just the stipend or salary. Tuition isn't typically a factor there. And there may be a research allowance or budget for a postdoctoral fellowship as well. The main difference here with the proposal process, although it's similar again in many ways in that it focuses on the training of the individual applying and what their future plans are to use this funding. One of the major differences is that there may be a requirement to have a host institution identified and perhaps even signing a letter or co-signing the application indicating that if the funding is received that there will be a slot available for you there. Excuse me. And a couple of examples. The first is the research postdoctoral fellowship, and the second is more of a clinical services fellowship. And then finally, I have scholarships listed. I know that there are probably some master's students perhaps on the call who may be saying, well, none of this applies to me. And that doesn't mean that there aren't grant opportunities for you. Scholarships are, I think, the most common external funding source for undergraduates and master's students. It's probably no news to you that there are scholarships out there. Unfortunately, they are not nearly usually as large in size, and so it may involve applying for multiple ones of them or being prepared that they provide usually smaller financial support. Usually are only for educational costs like tuition, and have a briefer proposal process, typically focused on the student or individual, the person themselves. There's one example is the David Pylon Scholarship for Training in Professional Psychology, which is right up the alley of the Chicago School. Now, outside of the scholarship or fellowship sort of arena, there are some other categories where students may be eligible. And this is, I say may, because there are certainly travel grants that students are not eligible for. So this will be a case where you would need to check very carefully what the eligibility criteria are. But travel grants will help specifically, as they sound like, fund travel costs. And usually for travel costs for a specific purpose. There may be travel grants available for research-related travel and or for conference travel to present at a conference. They do provide the typical funding for the typical costs of travel, usually up to a maximum amount, and usually you have to have a budget to show how you're going to spend the money. So the proposal process there is going to be fairly brief and focused on the specific project use of the funds, what the travel is for, and a justification of it. So I've listed a small travel scholarship for the APA annual convention, but there are many, many travel scholarship or travel grants out there, and it will really just depend on the purpose of travel that's needed and whether students are eligible to apply as you search for these. And then there are some hybrid and other types of grants. There may be some small research grants that support both some travel and some other research expenses. There are opportunities perhaps for you to find out about what faculty members might be doing that has external funding. There are a few faculty at TCSPP, hopefully growing, with external grants that were made to the organization, as I mentioned at the beginning, to support either research or programming. And grant funders often like to support students along with the work of the faculty that they are supporting. So it's worth inquiring if you are in a course or work closely with a faculty member, whether they know of an external grant that a faculty member has where you could perhaps be supported. And then finally, I don't want to leave out things like prizes and awards. They're not always financial prizes or awards, but sometimes they are for publications, posters, dissertations, and other kinds of commendations. And so those are something not to forget as well. So I want to say a few more words about timing. As I said at the beginning, the best time to start is probably yesterday and very early. I think it's important for any of you who are early in your educational career at the Chicago School not to necessarily wait. It's not necessary, for example, if you want to apply for funding for research or for a dissertation to have IRB approval. It's not necessary to have your dissertation proposal approved when you're starting the process. If you know enough about what you're going to work on to start thinking about putting together a proposal and to start thinking about looking for a funder that might support it, that's really when you should start. Most funders will allow the proposal for funding to be submitted without IRB approval. They'll need you to have it before you start using their money to do the research, because otherwise it's not legal. But you do not have to have IRB approval to submit a grant for funding in most cases. There's always some exceptions, but in most cases. So please, don't wait if you think if you think it's too soon in the process or you just started any of these things. Please don't hesitate to reach out and contact us and start inquiring, because I can guarantee you that it's not too soon. It does take time just to write the proposal itself, and I've put a 1 month as a good minimum time frame. We would always love to have more time to work with you, to help you find funding and to put together the best proposal you possibly can. But it's really not something you should try to do with, over a 1 week time period and just pull all-nighters all week. It's really something that takes time to be a really good proposal and also a positive experience for you. And I'll remind you that this is a competitive process, and so finding the way to find more time to spend on it will have a better result. The other thing to be aware of is that even after you submit the proposal or the application, there are many fellowships and grants that have a long review process. So you'll need to look carefully at what the date is when you'll be notified if you're successful and when you will actually get the money, and make sure that that's useful to you. It doesn't do you much good if the notification date is after you've already graduated. So it's important to factor all of that in to your timing, and another reason why I say it's never too early to start. The other important thing is that there are many fellowships and actually really many grants in general that have deadlines in the fall that basically correspond to the beginning of the academic year, so that when the traditional academic year starts in August or September, a month or so later is when a number of deadlines for fellowship applications and for some grants start to fall. So that's a time frame. It's good in that it may give a summer to prepare, but it's good to know that that's a time frame when there may be a lot of deadlines. Reading carefully is something that I would want to stress throughout this process, not just in terms of timing, but also in terms of the writing of the proposal itself. But in this case, it has to do with timing, and that you should read carefully to understand when you're eligible to apply, and as I said earlier, when you're likely to get the funding, so that you'll know if it makes sense for a particular grant for your specific timing of your graduate program. And the sooner you start, the easier it will be to time your application and your receipt of a grant to your educational program. And the likelihood of success will be higher because you really will have time to polish and make it as good as it can be. And we hope to work with, that you'll work with us as well, that you'll have time to do that so that we can provide any advice we can. I think that's the last slide that I'm going to present. So I am going to switch over and make Sandra the presenter.
Okay, let me see. Do you, I don't see the. Me. Could you go back, Katie? Because I'm not going to be able to pull up the presentation.
Okay.
I'm not. Yes.
Okay. If you'll make me presenter again, I can continue running through. Or did you want to just
do that, Sandra, if you'd like?
Sorry. Yes.
Katie, I'll make you the presenter. And then, Sandra, you'll be able to continue talking while, Katie, you manage the slides.
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
There we go.
So what we see here is that there's is COS Pivot, which is a funding database that we are subscribed to at the Chicago School. It's a database that is comprehensive in nature. It has over $33 billion of worth of funding opportunities, and it's available to students, faculty, and staff of the Chicago School. If you can just click on that, Katie. And forgive these technical difficulties for a minute. So you'll see that Pivot as itself has different tabs, and you can do a search, click Advanced Search. And so you'll see different fields on the sides. So you could even look at funding type. And you could say dissertation or thesis. You can, click on applicant type. And it could say graduate student. And let's say I want to write about in the top field about what it is, literacy. And you search. So you're coming up with some results of actual actual RFPs and grant opportunities that might be available, and you'll see the grant amounts on the side, and they range anywhere from $1,200 to $15,000 that can be and are accessible to students at different places. And so you would need to click on them and sort of take a look at each one. They could have websites that you can visit just so you can get more opportunities and get a sense of what each one is. Now, we are all registered users. Katie's a registered user. I'm a registered user. You can actually you can search without being a registered user, but you can also create searches that you would like to run on your own. And I would recommend that in that instance, you visit our website at the Chicago School, and you can actually go back to the presentation, Katie, and I'll run them through that. So click on the next slide, please.
Wait a minute. One moment.
It's okay. Can we? Well, while that's loading, what I can say is if you're able to find the Chicago Schools website and find the Office of Sponsored Programs, we have various resources on the side that should direct you to how to create a profile within Pivot using your Chicago school identification, and it allows you to create different queries and keyword searches so that information and different proposal opportunities or fellowship opportunities are mailed directly to you versus you having to search for them. So we do know that Pivot is a comprehensive database, and it conducts searches. So where you would do it is you would visit our website, you would look under the Funding Databases tab, and then see the COS Pivot tutorial, which should be able to direct you on how to do this. And then in general, for proposal writing and getting started, you'll be able to see that each fellowship opportunity or each proposal, request for proposal that'll come up basically lists an outline of what should be included in each proposal. And what Katie was referring to in terms of being very vigilant and reading the RFP is that that's what is contained in the RFP is basically the outline of what you will need to provide a funder in any proposal to be able to present the best possible case. Generally speaking, it will require a needs assessment or a statement of need, a needs statement. That is what is generally called. Data on what is your prior work, preliminary results or capacity, or perhaps data on a literature review or things of that nature. And it also allows you to determine what else you need to do as you're putting together the proposal, including determining who needs to be part of the proposal team, you know, what kind of expertise you need to have. So these are the typical parts of a grant proposal, and they're very common in many grant proposals, including the introduction and background. This is where you want to talk about the need and the significance of your project. Not what you need, but why this is a need in your field, why this is a need in your community, as well. And this is where you present the preliminary data, the needs statement, needs assessment, the prior work, the literature review of why this is necessary. Then you would go into the next segment is the goals and objectives of your project, which basically shows how your project is meeting an identified need that you just described above. And your goals should be specific, they should be measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound that are achievable within the time frame of the grant proposal. Next slide, please. Your project plan is the next typical component of a grant proposal, and this will include very specific activities and timeline, as well as who is on your team and what their expertise is, or why they are specific, what kind of expertise they bring to your team or to your proposal. the evaluation, and how you will know basically after you've conducted this project that you were successful. How will you know that if you met your activities, your timelines, your objectives, how will you know that you succeeded? And finally, once you've implemented this program and you've received this funding, how are you going to disseminate the results of this? Are you going to give a are you going to present at a conference? Is it going to be a presentation? How is this going to be? Are you going to put together a journal publication? These are some typical elements to consider. Next slide, please. And so, some tips in general to write an effective application. I think Katie said this before, and we can't underscore this enough. Really, you should read everything in the instructions and read the RFP very clearly, underline it, make sure you understand what is necessary. If you feel you have questions, you can call us, call the Office of Sponsored Programs, or call the specific funder to just ask your questions. As you are developing a template for your proposal, the next real tip is to develop the outline that is mirrored to the instructions. So follow the instructions exactly as they are written. If they ask for a 10-page proposal, submit a 10-page proposal. If they specify what font they want you to use, submit it in that font. If they're asking very specific questions, respond to every question that is asked. Please, as I said, OSP is very happy to work with you. We do ask that you do identify an appropriate faculty member to work with you on the application, that they can be an advisor or in a dissertation case, but please identify a faculty member. Because you are presenting a lot of text, another tip is to make the proposal as readable as possible. And that includes, if you're using graphics, to include them within the text of the proposal, like charts, to include subheadings and boldface, so that the viewer and the reader very clearly follows your train of thought. Next, use very simple English. It really helps with the clarity of your proposal. And if you are having any questions, I mean, sometimes these are read by lay reviewers who are outside of your discipline. So it would be helpful at times if you had someone outside of your discipline read it, just for the sake of clarity. And again, Dr. McGraw and I are accessible and are very happy to read and offer any types of edits. If there is a budget, we do ask that you submit a budget justification, which basically, it describes in detail why you included everything in your budget and how it supports your program implementation. You can never go wrong in just making sure that your proposal is readable, that it's free of typos, and that it's in the format requested. And it always, when in doubt, read your proposal one last time. Next slide, please. If you have any questions, I guess this is where we would take questions from participants. And also, if you have specific questions, you can direct them to either of us. I've included our emails at the bottom of this slide. So I'll transfer it to Ellen, who's going to field some questions.
Thank you so much, Sandra and Dr. McGraw. We do have a couple questions. The first question that we have, and this is from Nicole, she asked, do all fellowships expect one does not have a full-time job? Or are the dissertation fellowships considered differently?
I think dissertation fellowships are probably the more flexible variety. I think there is a concern with from a dissertation fellowship is really designed to make sure the dissertation gets done quickly. In the Chicago School framework, that's not usually it's not usually as much of an issue as it may be at some other institutions. So I think I don't have a flat answer because there are differences from funder to funder. So I think probably there will still be that requirement in many cases, but I think a dissertation fellowship is likely to be somewhat more flexible in some cases.
Thank you. The next question that we have, this is from Shakina, and she asked, are the individual fellowships difficult to obtain?
Oh boy, that's a broad question. Some individual fellowships are extremely difficult to obtain, and some, I think, I would imagine there are some out there that are not as well known and don't get as many applicants. So really, the focus is really putting together the best possible application you can put together. There probably will be some statistics that we can find on some of the major fellowships if you're considering them, so you can get a sense of how competitive they are. But another question that I can only answer sort of generally, that it's going to depend somewhat.
Great, Shakina said thank you.
Sure.
Nicole had asked another question, and this was a follow-up to the slide, the postdoc fellowship slide. She wanted to know, what does plus fringe mean?
Sandra, do you want to take a stab at that one?
That was on the slide.
No, go ahead, Katie.
Okay. Fringe would refer to fringe benefits, since in the postdoctoral case, most likely the place where you would be working might consider you an employee, and they might, for that purpose, provide benefits that the fellowship funding would provide for the cost of those benefits. Again, another generality in many cases, but not necessarily.
Great, thank you. Lucy's asking a question which is specific to her situation. She says, I'm an international PhD student. I'm wondering if there's funding available for courses that are abroad.
I don't know about courses.
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't know about courses. If you could make me the presenter again, I actually can probably do this.
Oops, no, that's screen.
Okay. So there was I pulled up something for international, but this is for dissertations. So I mean, I would look. I mean, this one, for instance, is for an international dissertation fellowship, 9 to 12 months of support in the humanities. It's open to graduate students regardless of citizenship. I would, take a look and pivot and see, what kind of flexibility there is. But there are opportunities, even for international students. Do you have any other comments, Katie?
I know of, and it's funny because of the title of the organization, but the American Association for University Women provides some funding for international graduate students as well. So there are opportunities out there. I think more than likely it's going to be more on the dissertation and research focus than the coursework phase, but it's definitely worth doing some digging.
Thank you. Karen has an interesting question. She said, it sounds like applications for fellowships call for something very similar to the dissertation defense. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, I mean, I would say certainly that there is an element of the material that you would be using would be the same basic material. I think, it will involve, because you would be applying to a particular organization who has a particular motivation for funding, that there's an element of selling your project in a way that you might not be doing in a dissertation defense. You're obviously defending your project in both cases, but there may be either a particular format in sort of the basic level, or there may be a need to in some cases reframe or describe your project in a certain way for a particular funder. But yeah, the basic material is going to be what you're using as your dissertation proposal or your dissertation defense.
Okay, great. Nancy has two questions. The first question: are dissertation grants usually quicker to receive? And I'm not sure, Nancy, if quicker compared to other types of grants, but Katie or Sandra, maybe you understand exactly what she's asking.
I would say student funding usually has on average a shorter review time between when you submit the proposal and when you get notification, because they're aware that students are in their programs for a limited period of time, but what that time frame is really is going to depend on whether it's a large organization or a smaller one that the funding is coming from, because bureaucracies tend to take somewhat longer. So there, I hate to keep saying it varies, but we can give some guidance once we know a specific situation as to what's going to be most practical.
Okay, thank you. The next part of her question, she's wondering, are there postdoc fellowships for IO psychology PhD students?
I don't have a specific one to name, but if you are interested in continuing research at an academic institution in an IO psychology field, I am fairly sure there are some possibilities out there. And again, I would remind you that there is often a need to have identified an institution that will host you, even if you're bringing the money through the fellowship, that you have to have a commitment from an institution in some cases. So I think there's a decent possibility. It's definitely something we should explore.
Absolutely. Let's see, we do have one more question, and Nancy says thank you.
You're welcome.
Ashley would like. She said that some of the grants in Pivot say the applicant type is new faculty, new investigator. Does a PhD student doing a dissertation count as a new investigator?
No, usually if that category in Pivot is referring to someone who has already been appointed as a faculty member, and in most cases that means someone who's completed their degree already. So I know sometimes there are doctoral or other, there are students who are adjunct faculty. In most cases, I think the ones that Pivot categorizes that way are for postdoctoral faculty. But it's worth looking at the eligibility criteria, not just in Pivot, but clicking through to the actual record for the funding opportunity and reading it more closely. And that goes in every case. Certainly, Pivot is a wonderful resource, but don't rely on it as the last word. You should always, when you find something that looks good, click through to the website of the source funder that it's coming from, and read there. And as Sandra said, call them if you're not clear, all that kind of thing.
Great. Ashley says thank you for the clarification, and great question, Ashley.
Yeah.
One other question, a student had wanted to know your recommendations for finding a faculty member to assist you with the grant writing process.
I don't think, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you go ahead, you start.
I think it's important to underscore that we're not asking for a faculty member to assist with the grant writing process, but it's a faculty member who might serve as a resource for you as you're developing your research question in that regard. Katie, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, no, I think that's a very good point. Neither of us are experts in your departments or fields, so we can certainly help with the taking the material and putting it into the form that the funder wants and making sure you're answering all the questions and following the format and the outline that they want, all that kind of thing. But in terms of knowing whether your research design is solid, whether, the kinds of things that reviewers who are in your field are going to be critiquing when they read a proposal, you really need your faculty member to do that. And so I think it's, it's someone that you feel you can work with, whether it's someone that's taught a course that you've been in that you think is someone that would do that, or if you already have your dissertation chair, in many cases that's the best person. So I would start, if you don't know where to start, I would perhaps start with your department chair and ask them if they have any suggestions to help you.
Thank you very much. I'm also wondering if maybe you can just give a quick overview of specifically the services that OSP is able to offer students.
Absolutely, that's a good segue to. I think Sandra has the page up, and it kind of yeah, exactly. It's kind of right there. Do you want to run through that a little bit?
Sure. So we can assist you with locating potential funding sources. So again, I'm happy to, Katie or I are both happy to arrange a time to meet with students to walk you through Pivot and your potential project. We also disseminate information externally, to the community about external funding opportunities. We do assist in preparing proposal applications, both in their submittal and in their review. Again, we would look at the RFP and we would at the application and just read it for consistency and how it mirrors the guidelines. We can provide assistance and review of budgets to ensure that the costs that are included are allowable costs. For faculty proposals, we often ensure that proposals conform with our policy and criteria and local regulations. We do and conduct informational webinars like those that like this one that you're participating on today. And we're happy to review and approve any external grant and contract proposal prior to submission.
And I think if you look at the sort of left-hand bar on our page, there are a lot of headings that run through all of the stages of developing a proposal. Some of the tips that we talked about today come through here. Some of the material here may not be relevant for the student grants as much as for the organizational grants that I talked about, but there's a lot of development and a lot of amplification of the material we provided here. So you can certainly peruse that at your leisure. And we did develop a student-focused page, which is the big link in the middle, because we knew that students are one of the major users of of this. And so we've got a little funny graphic, and I believe that we have a page of specific types of student announcements. I have to see what's there right now, but I think we had pulled up some, we had some links to various fields that students are in, or interest areas that students have, and these links, some have more than others, I will admit, currently have some options for you to peruse, but you'll also want to do your own research about your own specific interests and fields.
Great.
This is an excellent website. Thank you. Nancy is actually wondering if there are any physical offices for OSP.
So Dr. McGraw is on the DC campus, and I am on the Chicago campus on the 5th floor.
And we do not currently have any OSP staff physically located in Los Angeles, but we are very happy to work with students wherever they may physically be located.
Excellent, thank you. And Nicole just provided a comment, and she said, thanks so much for hosting this webinar. It was very helpful. So thank you for attending, Nicole.
Great.
At this time, if there are any additional questions, please post them into the chat. Nancy also provided a comment. She said, yes, this was very helpful. Thank you.
Great.
So in the meantime, if anyone does have any questions, they are able to reach out to either of you with those questions.
Yes.
Yes, please.
Okay, perfect. And Shakina also says, thank you for all the information and guidance.
Great.
You're very welcome.
The presentation is recorded, and so we will have a recording of the presentation posted onto the NCAID YouTube site by tomorrow. Dr. McGraw and Sandra, would you be willing to share any of the slides with the students via email? Am I able to provide those to the students? Some of the students have been, or the attendees have been asking.
Yes,
of course.
Feel free. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, excellent. Then I'll be sure to send a copy out to all of the attendees, so they'll have that for a resource as well. And Karen had responded, and she said this webinar was very much needed. Thank you so very much. So it looks like those are all of the questions that that we have for this evening. Dr. McGraw, Sandra, any final comments?
Just to really glad that so many students were able to attend, and I hope that some of you will take the next step and start pursuing some opportunities. And if you do, that you'll get in touch with one of us.
Thank you. This is really a unique topic and something that I think you know, many of the attendees were very interested in. So we really appreciate both of you taking the time to present and to you know, share the services that are available at OSP. And I'm sure many people will be looking at the website, which I was not even very familiar with myself. So thank you so much for sharing.
Great.
Thank you very much for arranging this, Ellen.
You're welcome. So we'll go ahead and end for this evening, and I will be sure to have the recording posted on the YouTube site and to send out the final the slides to everyone as soon as possible.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night.
Have a great evening.
Good night.